Montana Territory, 1883. The wind howled across the dry prairie as the train came to a grinding stop at the edge of Dry Willow Station, a place most people passed through and few ever stayed. Ruthie Mae Milburn stepped off the last passenger car, her worn boots touching the dust like she was unsure the earth would hold her. She clutched a single carpetbag to her chest, her back straight, her chin high, even if her eyes betrayed the ache of too many goodbyes. Her dress was clean but plain, blue cotton faded from the sun, and her gloves were stitched at the tips where they had worn through. The conductor gave her a pitying look as he tipped his hat. "Good luck, miss." Ruthie nodded, lips pressed tight, but said nothing. She had not come here for pity. Behind her, whispers had already started. A few men offloading crates near the general store looked her over, one spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Mail order bride," one muttered. "Poor fool who sent for her," another added. "She ain't worth the paper her letter was written on." Ruthie heard them. She always did. It was the same in Missouri, the same in Kansas, and now here she walked on. The man she was meant to marry never came. By the time the sun dipped behind the low hills, Ruthie sat alone outside the post office, her bag beside her, her hands folded and still. Sheriff Briggs passed her twice without saying a word. The saloon girls watched from the porch across the street, whispering behind fans and glasses of watered-down whiskey. It was nearly dark when a rider came in from the West Trail, tall in the saddle and dusted in grit. His hat was pulled low, a rifle slung over his back. He dismounted with quiet ease, tying his horse outside the blacksmith's. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, showing strong forearms, and his face was weathered like he had lived more years than he looked. Nathaniel McCall. He was not a man who sought trouble, but he did not walk away from it either. As he stepped toward the post office, his gaze caught on the woman sitting alone on the bench. He paused, hand resting on his belt. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. Ruthie looked up. Her voice was soft but steady. "Not anymore." Nathaniel studied her. "You Ruthie Milburn?" Her brows lifted. "Yes," he nodded once. "Name's Nathaniel McCall. I own a cattle spread 15 miles west. Your name showed up in the station registry. Figured something went wrong. You sent for me?" she asked, stunned. "No." "But I read the paper 6 weeks back. Man named Everett Rawle placed an ad for a wife, gave this town's name. He's dead. Found him up north, shot through the chest in a card game. He never got your letter." Ruthie closed her eyes for a moment. "I traveled 2 weeks for a ghost." Nathaniel shifted. "You got anywhere to stay?" "No." "You got money?" "No." "You got family?" "None I care to find." He nodded slowly. "Well, I could use help at the ranch. 2 little ones underfoot and no one to keep the house in order. You help me, I give you a roof and food." She blinked. "You have children?" "Yes, Naomi is 6. Nolan just turned 3. Their mother died 2 winters ago. I bury her under the cottonwood tree." Ruthie looked toward the edge of town where the sky was streaked in burnt orange. "You do not know me. You came all this way to marry a man you never met. I figure you are braver than most, and I got 2 children who have not had a soft voice in too long." Ruthie stood. "All right." They rode out that evening. Ruthie rode side saddle on Nathaniel's spare mare, her bag tied behind her. The land stretched wide and open, the grass dry but golden in the fading light. The McCall Ranch sat low in a wide valley, tucked between cottonwoods and the slow curve of Pine Creek. The house was modest but clean, with a barn, a corral, and a smokehouse out back. The children were already asleep when they arrived. Nathaniel showed her to a small room off the kitchen, where a narrow bed and a washstand sat waiting. "You can rest here," he said. "We talk more in the morning." Ruthie nodded, hands tight on her bag. "Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "I do not know what those men back in town said, but I figure it does not matter. You are here now. That counts for something." She watched him go, and for the first time in days her throat burned with something that felt like relief. By sunrise, Ruthie was up, apron tied, sleeves rolled, and bread in the oven. Naomi peeked around the doorframe with wide blue eyes, a rag doll in her arms. "You are not Mama," she said. "No, sweetheart." Ruthie said gently. But I can be kind. Nolan toddled in next, hair tousled and thumb in his mouth. He climbed into Ruthie's lap without a word and she held him steady. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed. They took to you fast. I do not mind, Ruthie said, smoothing Nolan's hair. That evening, after supper, Nathaniel handed her a small tin wrapped in cloth. Saw this in town, thought you might want it. She opened it to find a blue ribbon, delicate and soft. I figure you came here with little. Figured you might want something just for you. Ruthie touched the ribbon with shaking fingers. No one's given me a gift in a long time. He looked down. You deserve more than that. She tucked the ribbon into her dress pocket. By the end of the week, the children clung to her skirts and Ruthie's laughter started to echo through the house. She worked hard, but her hands had steadied, her steps no longer cautious. Nathaniel watched her more each day, not just her beauty, though it was there, but the way she held Naomi when she cried from nightmares, the way she hummed while hanging laundry, the way she listened. One afternoon, after brushing down the horses, Nathaniel found her out by the fence line, staring at the horizon. You all right? He asked. She nodded. Just thinking. About what, my worth? Folks have always told me I do not have much. Nathaniel stepped beside her, voice low. They are wrong. She looked at him, eyes wide and uncertain. He met her gaze without flinching. Your worth is my life's work now. Ruthie's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. He held it, firm and certain, and for the first time since she stepped off that train, Ruthie knew she was not alone. The first frost came early that year, fine and silver across the windows come morning. Ruthie stood at the stove, sleeves damp from scrubbing, her fingers red but nimble as she stirred cornmeal into a pot. Naomi sat near the hearth, bent over a slate with her tongue tucked in her cheek, trying to copy her name in careful letters. Nolan had fallen asleep with a spoon still in his hand, cheek pressed against the table. Nathaniel came in with the cold still clinging to his coat. He shook off snow at the door and hung his hat on the peg, his eyes finding Ruthie like they always did now, steady and quiet. He pulled off his gloves, watching as she ladled breakfast into a bowl and nudged it toward him without a word. You always move like you've got a clock ticking behind you, he said, settling across from her. She poured herself coffee and sat. Idle hands make for uneasy thoughts. He looked at her over the rim of his mug. You always been like that? I used to talk too much, she said, a little smile tugging at her mouth. Didn't do me any favors. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. You ain't been here long, but the house already carries differently, like it's got a heart ticking again. Ruthie glanced down at the table grain, tracing it with her finger. I've never tended a home that felt like it belonged to me. Does this one? She didn't answer right away. The wind rattled the shutters and somewhere outside a horse snorted in the cold. She looked up slowly. I think it could. That night, Ruthie found herself standing at the edge of the barn after supper, arms folded, watching Nathaniel mend a broken bridle by lantern light. His hands moved with practiced care, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. When she stepped closer, he glanced up but didn't stop working. You don't talk much when your hands are busy, she said. I talk when it matters. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the stall door. You never asked what I left behind. His fingers paused, then resumed. I figure you'll tell me when it's time. There was a man in Missouri, she said, voice low, eyes on the dirt. He didn't think I had any say in what happened under his roof. I left when I could. Took nothing but a coat and a name that wasn't his. Nathaniel nodded, finishing the last knot. That's not a thing to carry alone. I'm not asking you to carry it, I know, but I can walk beside you. She drew a slow breath, the cold curling into her lungs. You always this patient with folks who are half broke, only the ones worth the time. He stood and walked past her toward the house. She followed, her steps slow but sure. Days passed. Ruthie began to teach Naomi songs with hand motions, her voice softened by the walls. Nolan took to trailing her like a shadow, tipping his head whenever she spoke, his trust quiet but full. One afternoon, Nathaniel returned from checking fence lines with his coat torn at the shoulder and blood along his sleeve. Ruthie met him at the porch with narrowed eyes and a basin already in hand. "Sit," she said firmly, setting him on a stool. "It's not deep," he muttered. "You'll not be the judge of that." She cleaned the wound with clear water and vinegar, biting her lip as he flinched. He sat still, letting her work, his jaw set. After a moment, he said, "You handle pain like someone who's seen too much of it." She pressed a cloth against the scrape. "Hurt teaches you how to tend it in others." He caught her wrist gently. "I see you, Ruthie. Every part of you," her gaze flicked up. "Even the parts I keep quiet, especially those." She didn't move her hand from his. Later, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Ruthie sat by the hearth winding yarn into skeins. Nathaniel sat across from her, boots off, shirt clean and patched. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Next week I'll ride into town for winter supplies. I'd like you to come." She looked up. "Why?" "So folks see you beside me. So they know you're not just passing through." Her hands stilled. "That kind of talk gets noticed." "I wanted to." She set the yarn aside. "You sure?" "I've never been more." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then I'll come." Snow came that night, thick and quiet. Ruthie stood at the window long after the house had gone still, watching it fall in slow curtains across the yard. Behind her, the warmth of the fire softened the hush, and Nathaniel's shadow reached toward her across the floor. He didn't speak, just stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. They stood like that for a long while, no words, no promises. Just the snow, the warmth, and the quiet beginning of something whole. The road into town was half melted by late morning, slush pooling in the wagon ruts and soaking the hem of Ruthie's skirt when she stepped down from the buckboard. She adjusted her gloves and looked around. The main street was quieter than usual, horses tied along the rail outside the mercantile, smoke rising from the smithy's chimney. Nathaniel hitched the team without speaking, but his hand lingered a moment on her elbow before they walked together toward the store. Inside, the air was dry and warm. The shopkeeper, Mr. Winslow, glanced up from his ledger and froze just a second longer than politeness allowed. "Well," he said, pushing up his spectacles. "Didn't expect to see you, McCall." "I need lamp oil and flour," Nathaniel replied. "And Ruthie'll pick what else we need for the house." Winslow's eyes shifted to her. "You're the one come off the train few weeks back. Thought you'd gone on by now." "I didn't," Ruthie said calmly, meeting his gaze. "I work the McCall place." Winslow said and turned to the shelves. She didn't flinch. There was nothing left in her that bent for the sake of other people's comfort. Nathaniel waited by the counter while she moved through the small aisles, adding soap, dried beans, and a tin of sewing needles to the basket. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. When she returned to the front, he was speaking low to an older woman who wore a black shawl and walked with a cane. "I heard you took someone in," the woman said. "Folks are talking." "They always do," Nathaniel replied. "They say she's trouble. She's not." The woman's gaze moved to Ruthie. "You got a quiet way, makes people uneasy." "I'm not here to ease them," Ruthie said, setting the basket down. "I'm here to build something that lasts." The woman gave a dry chuckle. "Well, that's more than most can say." After they loaded the wagon and turned back toward the ranch, the sky shifted, low clouds rolling in over the hills. Ruthie drew her shawl tighter and looked ahead at the rising wind. "Naomi's going to need thicker stockings," she said. "Her ankles were pink this morning." "I'll ride to Red Elk's camp next week," Nathaniel said. "His wife, Willa, weaves good wool. Better than anything in town. She won't mind trading with me. She minds fools, not women with good sense." They rode in silence a while, the road winding past frozen creek beds and bare cottonwoods. At the edge of their land, Nathaniel pulled the team to a stop where a willow tree leaned over the fence line. "Ground'll thaw soon," he said. "I've been thinking of digging a second well, closer to the barn." She followed his gaze. "You'll need help. I was hoping you'd draw the plans. You see things I miss." She turned toward him. You trust me with that? I trust you with everything that matters. He didn't look away. Neither did she. That night, Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor beside Ruthie, sorting a handful of buttons by shape. Nalan dozed against Nathaniel's side, one hand curled in his shirt. The fire snapped low and the scent of beeswax and tobacco hung in the room. You ever learn Latin? Naomi asked suddenly. Ruthie raised a brow. Latin? No, sweetheart. Why? There's a book in the loft. It's got strange letters. Mama used to read from it. Nathaniel looked up. I didn't know you remembered that. She whispered it like a secret, Naomi said. Ruthie stood and crossed the room, her steps soft. Show me. They climbed the ladder into the loft. Dust hung in the air and the floor creaked beneath their weight. Naomi pointed to a small trunk in the corner. Ruthie opened it carefully and found a leather-bound book wrapped in linen. She turned the cover. The pages were filled with clean lines and foreign words. It's a prayer book, she said quietly. Old, maybe French Latin, Catholic. Naomi leaned close. Can you read it? Some, not all. Will you teach me? I'll try. Below them, Nathaniel's voice drifted up. Everything all right, Ruthie smiled down at him. We're finding pieces. Later, after the children were asleep, Ruthie stepped out into the cold. Nathaniel joined her on the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders without a word. I didn't think I'd ever be part of something steady, she said. You are. She turned to him, voice low. They called me a mail-order bride with no worth, Nathaniel. He reached for her hand, rough palm warm against hers. Your worth is my life's work now. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She leaned into him, and the hush of night wrapped around them like a vow. By mid-December, the McCall place had quieted into the rhythm of winter. Snow buried the fence posts in soft drifts, and the cattle huddled close beneath the shelter Nathaniel had repaired himself. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, and the days passed without rush, shaped by wood chopping, stew pots, and the hush that only comes when a house has finally settled around its people. Ruthie stitched by the window while Naomi practiced reading aloud from the prayer book, slow and halting, but proud. Ruthie corrected her gently, never rushing, always listening. Nalan, bundled in wool, pushed carved animals through little roads he'd drawn in the ash near the hearth, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration. Nathaniel had taken to rising earlier than usual, slipping out before the sun cleared the ridge to check the creek's edge for ice. He returned with his collar stiff from frost, hands reddened, and eyes always landing first on Ruthie when he came through the door. One morning, as she poured lard into a pan and scraped cornmeal from the bottom of a sack, he said, "We'll need to butcher the old so soon." "Meat's running low." She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Want me to salt what's left of the venison today, would you? I already got the crock cleaned." He watched her a moment. "You stay ahead of things like you're waiting for the ground to fall out." She didn't look up. "Habit." Nathaniel stepped closer, voice low. "It's all right if you let the ground hold you a while." She glanced at him then, not startled, just quiet like she was tucking the words away. That afternoon, they harnessed the oxen and pulled the sled down to the smokehouse. Naomi stayed behind with a neighbor's daughter who'd come to visit, a girl near her age with coal dark hair and a stubborn streak that made Ruthie smile. Nalan had taken to her instantly, trailing her like a pup. At the smokehouse, Nathaniel worked the blade while Ruthie packed the cuts in salt. The cold bit through her gloves, but she didn't complain. They worked without speaking for a time, the only sound the rustle of straw and the wet rhythm of the knife. "You ever trap before?" he asked finally. She raised a brow. "Trapped rabbits for supper when I was 12. Lost 3 fingers on a neighbor's dog trying to keep it from chewing through the snare." He paused. "You don't have scars." "My stepmother used lye soap on the cuts every night, said if a girl's hands looked useful, no man would want her." Nathaniel set the knife down, slow and deliberate. "That woman's still living. She was when I left, but she don't live in me." He crossed the space between them, hands raw from cold. "You've got nothing to prove here." "I know that," she said. "But sometimes my bones forget." He didn't speak again, just took her hands in his and held them, still gloved, until the numbness eased. As the days shortened, Ruthie began drawing the well-plans Nathaniel had asked for. She used the side of a charcoal stub on paper lined from an old ledger, her tongue pressed tight at the corner of her mouth as she calculated depth and draw, keeping the creek's flow in mind. When she showed it to him, he studied it long, tracing the lines with a callous thumb. "You thought of everything," he murmured. "I miss this," she said, "using my head, not just my hands." He folded the paper carefully. "You're building more than a well." She met his gaze. "You see that?" "I see everything you're doing," he said. "And I want you to know I don't plan to let you go." Ruthie didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of being wanted without demand. "I never thought I'd want to stay anywhere," she said. "But I don't want to leave." That night, they didn't sit on opposite sides of the room. Ruthie curled beside him on the settle after the children were tucked in, her head near his shoulder, his arm draped loosely around her waist. The fire burned low and the quiet held no strain. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Nathaniel pressed a kiss to her hair, slow and sure. She turned her face toward him, eyes steady. "I want a life with you." His answer came in the way he kissed her. No rush, no uncertainty, just a promise wrapped in warmth. And when she rested her head on his chest and let her eyes close, the house felt whole in a way it never had before. Not because it had walls or a fire or beds to sleep in, but because it held love now not loud or fragile, but rooted deep, like cottonwoods whose roots had found water after a long, thirsty stretch. They had found each other, and neither one would ever be alone again. The creek thawed in early March, running fast and cold over the stones where snow had once hushed its voice. Nathaniel and Ruthie stood at the edge of the rise above it, the morning sun catching in the water's ripples. He held a spade over his shoulder and she carried a coil of rope for measuring. Behind them, the children played beneath the cottonwoods, Naomi balancing along a fallen trunk while Nolan dragged a stick through the mud. Ruthie knelt and ran her fingers through the dark earth, eyes narrowing. "Ground's soft enough now. If we dig here, the slope'll help with runoff." "Water won't pool near the barn wall," Nathaniel nodded, planting the spade into the earth. "You think of things I wouldn't. You'd have figured it, just maybe a season too late," he chuckled, leaning on the handle. "You ever think about staying for good?" She looked up at him. "I haven't thought of leaving in weeks." He brushed a thumb over his jaw, watching her face as if memorizing something. "Then maybe it's time to stop circling it." "Circling what?" He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. It was creased and soft at the edges, as if he'd carried it a long while. "I sent for a preacher. He'll be here come Friday next." Ruthie stood slowly, her breath catching. "You mean to marry me?" "I don't mean to do anything else." Her hands stayed still at her sides. "You sure?" "I've never been unsure of you." Her answer was a single nod, but her eyes shone in the cold light, and he didn't need more. They returned to the house as the wind picked up, Ruthie pausing to shake the dirt from her skirt before stepping inside. Naomi looked up from the rug where she sat threading colored beads onto a string. "Papa," she asked, "do weddings need dresses?" Nathaniel started to answer, but Ruthie stepped in. "Only if the bride wants one." Naomi turned to her, hopeful. "Would you wear one?" "I think I would," Ruthie said, brushing a curl from the girl's cheek, "but I'll need help making it." "I can sew straight lines now," Naomi declared. "That's all we'll need." By the following Thursday, Ruthie had cut and stitched a simple dress from a length of ivory cotton she'd kept folded on the top shelf of the linen chest. She added a bit of lace from the hem of an old nightgown, and lined the collar with tiny shell buttons Naomi had picked from a jar. It wasn't grand, but it fit her well, and when she stood before the mirror with her hair pinned up and her hands folded at her waist, she looked like the woman she'd become, capable, rooted, and no longer afraid of being seen. Willa, Red Elk's wife, arrived that evening with a woven shawl dyed deep plum. "You'll need something for the wind," she said, placing it over Ruthie's shoulders. "I haven't earned this." "You've earned more than you know." "Take it." The preacher came the next morning, riding up just as the sun reached the top of the pine ridge. He was an older man with a voice like worn leather and hands that trembled slightly when he opened his book. Naomi and Nalan stood on either side of Ruthie, each holding one of her hands. Nathaniel faced her in his cleanest shirt, hair combed back, jaw set with quiet certainty. The vows were spoken without hesitation. When the preacher asked if Ruthie would take Nathaniel, her voice didn't waver. And when Nathaniel said yes, he added, "For all my days." Afterward, they stood alone in the quiet of the cottonwoods while the children ran ahead. "I never thought I'd wear a ring again," she said, looking down at the band he'd slipped on her finger. "It's not from a catalog," he replied. "It was my mother's. She left it to me in her will." She turned it slowly. "You sure she'd want me to have it? She'd have seen you the way I do. Her only rule was, love someone whose word holds weight." Ruthie stepped close, resting her cheek against his chest. "Then we're both living by her rule." The sun climbed higher, and they didn't move from that spot for a long while. In the weeks that followed, the ranch moved forward as it always had, fences mended, calves born, seeds planted. But the house held a new kind of ease. Ruthie's laughter came more often, and Nathaniel, though still a quiet man, reached for her hand without hesitation when they passed each other in the kitchen. Naomi began calling her mama without being asked, and Nalan curled against her during storms like he'd always belonged there. One warm evening, Ruthie sat on the porch mending a shirt while Nathaniel sanded a cradle he'd built from scrap pine. The cradle had taken him days, its joints fitted with care, its sides carved with wildflowers. Ruthie watched his hands, then lowered her needle. "You think it'll be a girl?" she asked. He looked up, eyes soft with something deep. "I think it'll be ours, that's enough." She smiled and set her sewing aside. "I never thought I'd have a family." "You didn't find one," he said. "You built it." She leaned in, pressing a kiss to his temple. "With you." And so they stayed through storms and springs, through lean seasons and years of plenty. Ruthie planted an herb garden along the back fence. Nathaniel taught Naomi how to ride bareback. Nalan took to carving, shaping toys from bark and branches. The well Ruthie designed never ran dry. The land held them, and they held each other. On their 5th anniversary, Nathaniel gave her a leather-bound journal with her name pressed into the cover. "So you can write down the life you made," he said. She did. Every page a record of love, not perfect but true. Of days earned with honest labor, of nights wrapped in warmth and trust. Of a man and a woman who found each other not with grand words or sudden declarations, but with hands held steady, hearts opened slowly, and the kind of love that takes root and stays. And they never needed anything more.